felt his gaze burn my skin before I even lifted my eyes. The entire hall fell silent when the king rose, knocking over a goblet of wine that stained the kingdom's map like spilled blood. "No one touches what is mine," he declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls as his gaze fixed on me. The mark on my wrist burned as if recognizing its creator's call. In that moment, with hundreds of eyes upon us, I knew my fate had been sealed by the man everyone feared, but whom only I dared to defy. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you're following us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. I remember the cold before I remember the pain. The cold came first, as if the river wanted me back, as if the icy water called my name, the name no one else spoke. I floated between white and black, hearing only the distant beat of a heart I no longer knew was my own. When I opened my eyes, there was a shadow over me, the outline of a man who seemed made of shadows and firelight. He touched my bluish skin with his fingertips, and the world, which until then had been dissolving, held its breath. It was his touch that pulled me from the river and returned me to the torment of life. They said later that the king himself had interrupted the hunt to find me, that he dismounted his horse, walked across the stained snow, and lifted me into his arms without hesitation, as if my body, dirty and trembling, were a sacred artifact. I saw him only in a glance, his severe profile, his damp beard, his gaze that never wavered. And in that gaze something burned, not pity, never pity. It was something else, an ancient force, a recognition that pierced me whole. I spent days among sheets that were not mine, in a room where the fire crackled like a constant threat. The maids whispered outside. They said I was the fugitive Omega, the orphan who had thrown herself into the river to escape her fate. They also said the king had leaned over me, that his lips had touched my forehead before I began to breathe again. No one knew what it meant, but everyone felt that something had been broken. The silence in the castle had become thick ever since, as if the walls awaited a scandal. When I finally managed to stand, the woman who served me averted her eyes at the sight of me. I still trembled, and my reflection in the mirror seemed like that of a stranger, pale skin, cracked lips, hair matted to my neck. The mark on my wrist, that crescent-shaped scar, burned like never before. It was the seal of my condition, the reminder of what I could never be, the Omega of impure blood. The bastard without lineage, the one the river tried to claim and the king decided to spare. On the first night I descended to the great hall, the murmuring ceased. The ladies stared at me as if I carried an invisible disease. The men merely whispered, measuring the extent of His Majesty's audacity. I felt each gaze like a needle piercing my skin. In the center of the hall, he, the king, conversed with his counselors, his posture erect, his velvet cloak falling over broad shoulders. When his eyes met mine, the air thinned. No words were spoken, but everyone understood that look was a mistake that could change everything. The Queen Mother, draped in jewels and disdain, was the first to react. She approached with that porcelain smile and asked, loud enough for all to hear, if I remembered how I had ended up in the river. I smiled, even with my heart pounding, and replied that the river sometimes takes only what is already dead. She arched her eyebrow, feigning courtesy, but I saw the poison dance behind her eyes. The king watched silent, and his silence was a promise, or a sentence. In the days that followed, the court became an arena. The daughters of noble houses avoided me in the corridors. The maids stopped lighting candles in my room, and rumors grew like fungi on the cold walls. They said I had bewitched the king, that his touch on my frozen body had sealed a curse. They said I was the living memory of an ancient guilt. I merely walked with what dignity remained, my steps firm on the marble floor, pretending not to hear. But there were nights when the wind blew through the cracks, and I saw him, standing under the inner courtyard's balcony, his back to me, gazing at the snow-covered garden. He said nothing. He just remained there, motionless, as if waiting for me to call him. I never called, because I knew a call from me would carry the weight of destiny, and I was already tired of imposed destinies. My story with the river didn't begin the day the king found me. The river and I were old acquaintances. It was on its banks that I grew up in Blackstone Village, where laundresses beat clothes on smooth stones and barefoot children searched for treasures in the sand. My mother said I was born during a flood, that my first cry was muffled by the roar of the waters. The river gives, and the river takes, she would say, wringing wet rags with her calloused hands. I didn't know then how much those words would weigh on me. The village lay on the kingdom's outskirts, in forgotten lands where the king's power reached only in the form of taxes and occasional soldiers. No one cared about her. We were just shadows around the fire, telling stories of wolves and spirits trying to survive another harsh winter. My mother washed the village's clothes and I helped her, my hands always red from the cold, my fingers burning in the icy water. At night, she taught me letters from old books she guarded like treasures. A woman who reads is a woman who chooses her own path, she whispered, as if it were a dangerous secret. It was after the black fever that everything changed. The disease swept through the village like a wildfire, leaving only ashes and silence. My mother was one of the first to go. I remember her face marked by dark spots, her dull eyes that no longer recognized me in the end. I held her hand as she slipped away from me and I promised I would survive. She smiled, that faint smile that haunts me to this day, and said, "Take care of the mark. Hide it from them." The mark on my wrist, that crescent-shaped scar. An inheritance from the father I never knew, a man my mother mentioned only in whispers. He came from the north, was all she would say, her eyes lost somewhere distant. The mark would burn sometimes, especially on full moon nights, and I would hide it under fabric bands, obeying her last wish. After my mother's death, there was no place for me in the village. Families barely managed to feed their own children, and a 13-year-old orphan was just another mouth to feed. One of the laundresses, old Marta, allowed me to sleep in her barn for a few weeks. "Only until you find your way," she said, avoiding my gaze. Everyone in the village always avoided my gaze. That's when the king's men arrived. Not common soldiers, but silent men, with sharp eyes and heavy hands. They were looking for orphans, boys to train as soldiers, girls to serve in the castle. "By order of His Majesty," they announced in the village square, and mothers hid their children. But there was no one to hide me. "That one has the mark," one of the men said, pointing at me. I tried to run, but strong hands grabbed me. The band on my wrist was torn off, and the exposed mark gleamed under the weak winter sun. The men exchanged glances. One of them, the oldest, bowed slightly as if before something valuable. "The king will like her," he said. I didn't understand then what that meant. I was taken along with 5 other children, tied up and thrown into the cart like an animal. During the journey, I tried to escape twice. The first time, I almost managed to untie the ropes, but I was discovered and punished with a day without water. The second time, I jumped from the moving cart and ran into the woods. They pursued me with dogs, and when they found me hanging from a tree, dirty and exhausted, the older man smiled. "Wild, as they say," he murmured. "Perfect." The castle appeared on the horizon after 5 days of travel, enormous and grey with towers that seemed to pierce the sky. The other children looked on in wonder, but I felt only the weight of chains closing around me. Those walls would be my prison. They separated us as soon as we arrived. The boys were taken to the training yard, the girls sent to the kitchens and laundry. I, however, was led down a different corridor. The old woman who guided me had fingers twisted like dry branches and eyes that seemed to see through skin. "The mark," she said, holding my wrist tightly. "It's ancient, older than the castle itself." I was handed over to Lady Hilda, a severe-faced woman who supervised the Queen Mother's personal maids. "This one won't do," she said, seeing my tangled hair and dirty nails. "She looks like an animal." But when she saw the mark on my wrist, her face paled. Without another word, she dragged me through the corridors to a small room at the back of the kitchens. "Clean her up," she ordered the younger maids. "And don't tell anyone about the mark." I was scrubbed so hard my skin turned red, my hair pulled and cut short at the neck, my clothes replaced by a rough grey dress. When they finished, I looked at myself in the polished metal mirror and didn't recognize the girl staring back at me. Days became a routine of servitude. I woke before sunrise, carried water, cleaned corridors, served the ladies of the court. Lady Hilda watched me constantly, her eyes following my every move as if she expected me to make some fatal mistake. At night, I collapsed exhausted onto the thin mattress in the room I shared with 3 other maids. I dreamed of the river, of my mother, of the village I had left behind. The Queen Mother rarely appeared before the servants, but her presence hung over the castle like a storm about to break. They said she had ruled the kingdom since the death of the previous king, that her son, the current king, was merely a puppet in her hands. They also said she consulted witches and sorcerers, that she drank blood to maintain her youth, that she had eyes and ears in every corner of the castle. I doubted many of these stories, but one thing was certain. Her power was real and her cruelty palpable. It was during my 4th month in the castle that everything changed again. I was cleaning the corridor that led to the royal chambers when the king himself appeared, accompanied by 2 counselors. I bowed deeply as I had been taught, hoping they would pass without noticing my presence. But I felt the air shift, the footsteps cease. When I looked up, he was watching me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. "The mark," one of the counselors said, and I realized too late that my dress sleeve had ridden up, exposing the scar on my wrist. I tried to hide it, but the king approached and held my arm with surprising gentleness. His eyes, blue as ice under the sun, studied the mark for a long moment. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer than I imagined. "Lyra," I replied, and my own voice seemed strange, as if I hadn't used it in a long time. Something passed through his gaze. Recognition, surprise, or perhaps just curiosity. "Lyra," he repeated as if tasting my name. "Where do you come from?" "From Blackstone Village, Your Majesty. From the village by the river." The councillors exchanged glances, but the king kept his eyes fixed on me. I felt the warmth of his touch on my wrist, a warmth that seemed to ignite something forgotten within me. "Bring her to the library tonight," he said to one of the councillors, without averting his gaze. "There are questions I need to ask." That night, I was escorted to the Royal Library, a forbidden place for someone of my station. Lady Hilda almost fainted when she heard about the summons. "What have you done, foolish girl?" she cried, straightening my dress and hair as if it could save my life. "If you've offended the king, we are all lost." The library was a labyrinth of shelves reaching the ceiling, ancient books whose scent of wisdom and secrets filled the air. The king was alone, poring over a volume with a worn cover. When I entered, he didn't immediately look up, and I had a moment to observe him unnoticed. He wasn't as old as I had imagined, perhaps 30 years, his face marked more by worries than by time. The crown rested on the table, and without it, he seemed almost human. "Lyra of Blackstone Village," he finally said, closing the book. "Do you know why you are here?" I shook my head, my throat suddenly dry. "The mark on your wrist," he continued, rising and approaching. "It is not common. It is the symbol of the House of Luna, a lineage we believed extinct 17 years ago." The world seemed to spin around me. "I don't understand, Your Majesty." "Your mother?" he asked. "What was her name?" "Helena," I replied, my voice trembling. "Helena of Blackstone Village." A sad smile touched his lips. "No, before that. Before she fled to the village, before she hid." My heart beat like the wings of a trapped bird. "I don't know what you're talking about, Your Majesty. My mother was just a laundress." "Your mother," he said, so close now that I could feel the warmth of his breath, "was Ilara of the House of Luna, my mother's sister, which makes you Lyra." "A lie," I completed, recoiling. "A mistake. I am no one, Your Majesty. Just an orphan from the village." "The mark doesn't lie," he said, his fingers brushing my wrist where the scar burned. "Blood doesn't lie. You are the last of the Luna lineage, the heir my mother thought she had eliminated along with your family." The words fell upon me like stones. My mother, a noble, a fugitive princess, and I, an heir? It was absurd, impossible. I was just Lyra, the orphan, the maid, the girl the river almost took. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice choked. "What do you want from me?" The king studied me for a long moment, his eyes penetrating mine as if searching for something long lost. "The truth," he finally replied, "and perhaps an ally." That's how I began to live a double life in the castle. During the day, I remained the invisible maid, cleaning corridors and serving the ladies. But at night, I was secretly summoned to the library, where the king, Alaric, as I began to call him in those private meetings, told me the story of my family, of the betrayal that had destroyed the House of Luna, of the coup that had placed the Queen Mother in power. "Your mother was the only one who escaped," he explained on one of those nights, his voice low like the murmur of the wind. "We all thought she had died with the others. She must have carried you still in her womb." "Why would the Queen Mother do that?" I asked, still unable to fully believe the story. "Why kill her own family?" "Power," he replied simply. "The prophecy said the lunar lineage would bring a ruler who would unite the divided kingdoms. My mother was unwilling to share the throne with anyone, much less with her younger sister, the people's favourite." Gradually, the pieces began to fit. The glances that always followed me in the village, the way my mother hid the mark, her knowledge that went far beyond what a simple laundress should know. The stories she told me before bed about princesses and castles were not just fairy tales. They were disguised memories. "And now?" I asked after weeks of these revelations. "What happens to me? What happens to us?" Alaric approached, his gaze softer than I had ever seen. "Now you choose," he said. "You can continue living as Lyra the maid, or you can reclaim your place as heir of the House of Luna. I can protect you, but the danger will be immense. My mother will not hesitate to eliminate you as she did your family." I thought of my mother, of her last request to hide the mark, of everything she had sacrificed to keep me alive. I thought of the village, of the river that almost took me, of the children I grew up with. And I thought of Alaric, the king who should be my enemy, but who, each night, became something closer and more dangerous. "I want the truth," I finally replied. "I want justice. For my mother, for my family, for all that your mother destroyed." A rare smile lit Alaric's face. He held my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine with an intimacy that made my heart race. "Then we will begin tomorrow," he promised. "But tonight I want to show you something." He led me through secret passages of the castle, corridors that seemed to exist between the known walls. We climbed stone stairs worn by time until we emerged in an abandoned tower. From above, one could see the entire kingdom, the fields, the forests, the river winding in the distance like a silver ribbon under the moonlight. "This was your mother's favourite place," Alaric said, his arm brushing mine as we observed the landscape. "Ilara used to say that from here she could see the future." "And what did she see?" I asked, my voice almost lost in the wind. "Peace," he replied, his eyes meeting mine in the twilight. "A united kingdom under a single crown, an alliance sealed not with blood, but with something stronger." Before I could ask what could be stronger than blood, I felt his fingers touch my face, tracing the curve of my cheek with a gentleness no one had ever shown me. The world seemed to slow, the wind ceased, and when his lips met mine, I understood what my mother had seen from the top of that tower. Future, possibility, hope. The next morning, everything changed again. I was ripped from bed by guards, dragged through the corridors like a criminal. The Queen Mother awaited in the throne room, her face a mask of controlled fury. Beside her, Lady Hilda trembled, her eyes downcast. "So it's you," the Queen said, her voice sharp as ice. "The lunar bastard who hides like a rat among us." I held my head high, refusing to show fear. "I hide no longer, Your Majesty." A murmur rippled through the assembled court. The Queen Mother rose, magnificent in her rage. "Confess, then. Confess to being the daughter of the traitor Ilara?" "I confess to being the daughter of Helena of Blackstone Village, who was once known as Ilara of the House of Luna," I replied, feeling the mark on my wrist burn as if it recognized the moment. "Treason," the Queen cried. "Conspiracy against the crown. This creature infiltrated our midst to assassinate the king, to avenge her cursed lineage." The court erupted in exclamations of horror. I saw familiar faces, maids I had worked with, nobles I had served, all looking at me as if I were a monster. Only one face remained serene among the crowd, that of the old woman with twisted fingers who had examined my mark on the first day. She nodded slightly as if giving me strength. "Where is the king?" I asked, my voice firmer than I expected. "I would like His Majesty to hear these accusations." The Queen Mother smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "My son is indisposed this morning. Too much wine, I fear. Or perhaps..." Her gaze swept over my body with disdain. Other excesses that a cunning maid might provide. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I held her gaze. I am not a cunning maid, Your Majesty. I am Lyra of the House of Luna, niece of the deceased king, cousin to your son, and I demand a fair trial. The Queen Mother laughed, a metallic sound that echoed off the stone walls. You demand nothing. You beg like the bastard spawn you are. Guards, take her to the dungeons. Tomorrow the pyre will decide her fate. I did not fight when the guards dragged me away. I did not scream. I did not plead. Something within me had changed. The frightened girl who had arrived at the castle months earlier had disappeared, replaced by someone who carried the weight of a name, of a history, of a promise made under the moonlight. The dungeon was cold and damp, the floor covered with rotten straw. I sat in the driest corner, hugging my knees to my chest to conserve warmth. I thought of Alaric, of our kiss in the tower, of the words we had exchanged. Was he truly indisposed, as his mother claimed? Or had something worse happened? Perhaps he had never planned to help me. Perhaps it was all just a cruel game to expose the last lunar heir. Hours passed, or perhaps days. It was impossible to tell in the constant darkness of the cell. When the door finally opened, I prepared to face death. But it was not the guards coming to take me to the pyre. It was the old woman with twisted fingers carrying a lantern and a cloth bundle. Quickly, she whispered, unlocking my chains with a rusty key. We don't have much time. Who are you? I asked, massaging my aching wrists. Someone who swore loyalty to your mother long ago, she replied, handing me the bundle. Inside, I found men's clothes and a silver dagger with the same crescent moon engraved on it that I carried on my wrist. You need to escape now. What about Alaric? The king? The old woman hesitated. The king is confined to his chambers, guarded by men loyal to the Queen Mother. She discovered your nightly meetings, discovered your plan. What plan? I asked, confused. We had no definite plan. The Queen Mother believes you did. She believes you plan to announce your kinship, to claim your place in the succession. She will not allow it. I quickly put on the clothes, hiding my hair under a wool cap. The old woman guided me through secret passages similar to those Alaric had shown me, until we emerged into the stable yard. A horse awaited, already saddled and provisioned. Go east, the old woman instructed, helping me mount. Beyond the Grey Peak Mountains, there are others who remained loyal to the House of Luna. They will help you. I can't abandon him, I protested. I can't leave Alaric at her mercy. The old woman held my hand, her twisted fingers squeezing mine with surprising strength. Your destiny lies beyond these walls, child. His has not yet been decided. Go. Survive. As your mother survived. With a heavy heart, I leaned down and kissed the old woman's wrinkled forehead. Tell him I will return. I rode under the cloak of night, the wind cutting at my face, the lunar dagger hidden close to my chest. Behind me, the castle dwindled in the distance, its towers silhouetted against the starry sky. I didn't look back when I reached the forest, nor when I crossed the river, that same river that had almost taken me once. This time, I chose my own path. Days turned into weeks as I rode east, avoiding roads and villages, keeping to the shadows of the forest. The horse was strong and resilient, obviously chosen by someone who knew the difficulties of the journey well. The provisions lasted long enough for me to reach the first foothills of the Grey Peak Mountains, where the air grew thin and the cold penetrated to the bones. It was in a narrow valley between snowy peaks that I found my first allies. 3 men emerged from the woods, boughs in hand, faces covered by masks that left only their eyes exposed. I didn't try to flee. Instead, I raised my wrist, exposing the crescent moon mark that I now wore with pride. I am Lyra of the House of Luna, I declared, my voice firm despite my weariness. Daughter of Ilara and niece of the murdered king. The men slowly lowered their weapons, exchanging surprised glances. One of them, the tallest, approached and removed his mask, revealing a face scarred and a grizzled beard. His eyes, however, were kind as they fixed on mine. The child survived, he murmured, almost to himself. After all these years, I was led through invisible trails to a hidden village nestled among the mountains. Stone houses clustered around a central square where a fountain bubbled with crystal-clear water. People emerged from their doors as we arrived, curious glances following the stranger who rode with the hunters. Children ran alongside us, pointing and whispering. The grizzled man who introduced himself as Thorn, former captain of the Royal Guard, led me to the largest house. Inside, a woman awaited, seated before the fireplace. Her hair was white as snow, elaborately braided over her head like a crown. When she looked up at me, a shiver ran down my spine. They were my mother's eyes. "Aunt Helena always said you would come," the woman spoke, her voice soft as silk. "When the moon was full and the throne in danger." You knew my mother?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. "I am Lyanna," she replied, rising with a grace that defied her apparent age. "Your mother's cousin, last of the elders of the House of Luna." In the weeks that followed, I learned more about my history than in my entire life. The House of Luna was not just a noble family, but a guardian of ancient secrets. The mark on my wrist was not a simple birthmark, but a sign of the pact made between my ancestors and the forces of nature centuries before. The power to heal, to foresee, to influence tides and seasons. All of it ran in my blood, dormant, waiting to awaken. "Your mother hid these gifts from you to protect you," Lyanna explained as she taught me to control the energy that pulsed beneath my skin. "But now you must embrace them. The kingdom needs the balance that only the House of Luna can provide." I absorbed every lesson eagerly, finally understanding the strange dreams I had always had, the inexplicable sensations, the deep connection to the river and the moon. But even as I grew in power and knowledge, my thoughts often returned to the castle, to Alaric, to the unfulfilled promise. "What happened to him?" I asked Thorn one night, as we watched the stars from the watchtower. "To the king? Is there news from the capital?" The old warrior sighed, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Messengers arrived yesterday. The Queen Mother is tightening her grip. The king is alive but rarely leaves his chambers. They say he is ill, consumed by a mysterious fever." "Poisoned," I concluded, feeling the anger rise within me. "She is killing him slowly." "Probably," Thorn agreed. "The old viper always preferred poison to the sword." "I have to go back," I declared, my hands gripping the stone balustrade. "I have to save him." Thorn studied me for a long moment. "You love him," he finally said, not a question, but a statement. I didn't answer immediately. Love? What I felt for Alaric was more complex than any word could express. It was recognition, complicity, desire, but also duty, destiny, necessity. "He saw me," I replied simply. "When everyone else looked through me, he saw me." The plan took shape in the following months. As winter deepened, transforming the mountains into impenetrable fortresses, I trained my body and mind. I learned to fight with the lunar dagger, to ride like the ancient warriors, to control the elements when my powers finally awakened under Lyanna's patient guidance. I also learned politics, history, the alliances that could be forged among the noble houses discontented with the Queen Mother's rule. And in secret, I sent messages. Small birds carried my words to the castle, to those who remained loyal to the memory of the old king. Those who suspected the truth behind the death of the House of Luna. Slowly, carefully, a network of allies formed, awaiting only the signal to act. When the first snows of spring melted, leaving the paths passable again, I knew it was time. On the night of the full moon, we prepared for departure. 50 warriors, men and women who had sworn loyalty to the House of Luna, awaited in the village courtyard, weapons ready, faces painted with the crescent moon symbol. Lyanna met me in the stables, where I was adjusting my horse's harness. Her hands placed something heavy around my neck, a silver medallion with the moon insignia inlaid with blue stones. "This belonged to your mother," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears, "and before her to your grandmother. It is the symbol of the lunar heir. Wear it with pride and purpose." I touched the medallion, feeling it warm against my skin, as if it recognized its rightful place. "I will return," I promised. "With Alaric, and together we will restore balance to the kingdom." Lyanna smiled, that wise smile that made me think of my mother. "Be careful with promises made under the full moon, child. They have a habit of fulfilling themselves in unexpected ways." I didn't fully understand the meaning of her words then. I would only understand much later, when it was already too late to turn back. The journey back to the castle was swift and determined. We rode day and night, avoiding villages and main roads, using trails known only to Thorn and his men. As we approached the capital, more allies joined us, peasants with scythes and pitchforks, merchants with hidden swords, even some deserting soldiers who had served under the old king. The night before our arrival, we camped in the forest surrounding the castle. From a high vantage point, I could see the torchlit towers, the walls that had once imprisoned me. It seemed a lifetime since I had fled there, and in many ways, it was. The Lyra who returned was no longer the frightened orphan, nor even the maid who had discovered her lineage. She was something new, forged in the mountains, tempered by knowledge and purpose. The south gates will be open at dawn, Thorn informed me, after returning from a meeting with our spies in the city. The guard will be minimal. The Queen Mother has convened a special council. All nobles and officials will be in the throne room. For what? I asked, studying the castle map spread before us. Thorn hesitated, his gaze meeting mine with reluctance. To witness the king's abdication. They say he is so debilitated he can barely stand. The Queen Mother will officially assume the throne. I felt my blood run cold. Then we have no time to lose. In the pre-dawn hours, we donned our dark cloaks and moved like shadows through the forest. The south gates, as promised, were only partially guarded, the work of our internal allies. We slipped inside the walls without a sound, dispersing as planned. My group, led by Thorn, headed for the royal chambers, while others positioned themselves strategically throughout the castle. The corridors were both familiar and strange, like paths traversed in dreams. Occasional guards were silenced before they could raise the alarm. Servants who crossed our path were detained and locked in pantries. When we finally reached the door to the royal chambers, my heart beat so loudly I feared it could be heard through the walls. 2 guards protected the entrance, burly men with the Queen Mother's emblem on their uniforms. We had no chance to act. They fell simultaneously, silent arrows hitting their throats. I looked back and saw Liana emerging from the shadows, bow still in hand, her face calm, as if she had merely gathered flowers. "Go," she said simply. "Fulfill your destiny." The door yielded easily under my hand, and the room beyond was steeped in gloom. Heavy curtains blocked the dawn light, and the air smelled of sickness and bitter medicine. For a moment, I thought the room was empty. But then I distinguished the form beneath the covers, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. "Alaric," I called softly, approaching the bed. He opened his eyes slowly, as if the simple act required immense effort. His face, once strong and determined, was grey and gaunt, his eyes sunken in dark hollows. When he recognized me, something flashed briefly in his gaze. Surprise, joy, perhaps hope. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice so weak I had to lean in to hear him. "You came back." "I promised I would," I replied, taking his hand in mine. It was cold and light, the skin almost translucent over his bones. "What did she do to you?" "Poison," he confirmed, trying to sit up and failing. "Slow, undetectable, in the food, in the wine, in the air I breathe." The rage swelled within me, igniting the power that pulsed in my veins. I placed my hands on his chest, feeling the weak heart struggling beneath my fingers. "I'm getting you out of here," I promised. "We'll go to the mountains. Liana can cure you completely." A faint smile touched his lips. "Always so determined," he murmured. "That's why." A cough interrupted him, staining his lips red. "Don't speak," I ordered, helping him to stand. "Conserve your strength." With Thorn's help, we dressed Alaric in simple clothes and supported him between us. He could barely stand, but his determination was palpable. When we stepped into the corridor, however, the sound of bugles echoed through the castle. "The alarm has been raised," Thorn said, tense. "We need to change the plan. We won't be able to exit through the gates now." "The secret passages," Alaric suggested, each word clearly costing him effort. "In the library. They lead to the riverbanks." It was risky, but we had no choice. We changed direction, avoiding the main corridors, using service passages I knew from my days as a maid. The sounds of combat echoed distantly, our allies engaging the guards loyal to the Queen Mother. When we reached the library, however, it was not empty. The Queen Mother awaited, seated calmly in a leather armchair, as if expecting guests for tea. 3 elite guards flanked her, swords drawn. "Ah, the family reunited," she said, her cold smile contrasting with the fury in her eyes. The rebellious son and the bastard niece. How touching. Thorn immediately placed himself in front of us, sword in hand. Lyanna emerged from the shadows, bow ready. But the Queen Mother merely laughed, a sound that reminded me of breaking glass. "Do you truly believe you can defeat me? I, who have governed this kingdom for decades, who eliminated all obstacles to my power? Including your own sister?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "Including innocent children?" "Necessary sacrifices," she replied with a dismissive gesture. "Power demands blood, girl. Something you will never understand." "Mother," Alaric intervened, his voice stronger than I expected, laden with authority despite his weakness. "It's over. The council knows the truth. The documents proving your treason have been found." A shadow of doubt crossed the Queen Mother's face, quickly replaced by scorn. "What documents?" "There is no proof." "The old king's journal," I replied, feeling the lunar medallion burn against my skin. "The one you thought you had destroyed. My mother took it when she fled. He recorded everything. Your plans, your involvement with witches, the poison you used on him, the same one you now use on your son." The Queen Mother rose slowly, her face a mask of fury. "Guards," she ordered. "Kill them, all of them." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The guards advanced. Thorn faced the first, their swords clashing forcefully. Lyanna fired an arrow that found the second's shoulder. The third came toward me, sword raised for a fatal blow. Instinctively, I raised my hands. The power I had learned to control in the mountains exploded through me, a wave of pure energy that slammed the guard against the wall. He fell, unconscious or dead, I couldn't tell. The Queen Mother's eyes widened, finally comprehending what she faced. "Lunar magic," she hissed. "So the rumors were true." "Truer than you imagine," I replied, the medallion now glowing visibly beneath my clothes. She recoiled, reaching for something in the folds of her dress. A dagger, I realized too late. But it wasn't me she aimed at. With a swift movement, she lunged at Alaric, who barely stood, leaning against the bookshelf. "If I cannot rule," she screamed, "no one will." I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I simply acted. The power exploded from my hands again, this time directed and precise. The Queen Mother froze mid-motion, the dagger inches from Alaric's chest. Her face contorted in an expression of surprise and horror as the lunar magic enveloped her like a shimmering web. "This is impossible," she gasped. "Lunar power cannot kill," I completed, approaching slowly. "You are right. I am not taking your life. I am taking your time." Before our eyes, the Queen Mother began to change. Her smooth skin wrinkled, her hair darkened and then turned white. Her eyes lost their sparkle. It was like watching decades pass in seconds. When she finally fell to her knees, she was merely a decrepit old woman, trembling and confused. What have you done to me?" she asked in a broken, unrecognizable voice. "Justice," I replied simply. "You will live out your remaining time as a common woman, without power, without magic, without the poison that kept you young all these years. You will live to see the kingdom flourish without you." Thorn had already subdued the other guards. Lyanna approached, examining Alaric with experienced eyes. "We need to get him out of here now," she said. "The poison still runs in his veins." With the Queen Mother neutralized, the castle fell quickly. Our allies had secured strategic points, and many guards, upon learning the truth, laid down their weapons. The council, gathered in the throne room for the supposed abdication, found themselves instead before the lunar heir and the rightful king, supported by men and women willing to die for them. The next few weeks were a time of transformation. Alaric, slowly regaining his strength under Lyanna's care, reassumed control of the kingdom with a firm but just hand. The Queen Mother, now a shadow of her former glory, was confined to a distant convent, where she would spend her final days in forced contemplation. And I finally found my place, not as a maid, not as a fugitive, but as Lyra of the House of Luna, officially recognized as the king's cousin, a royal counselor, bearer of the ancient magic that for so long had been feared and persecuted. The climax came during the new moon feast, when goblets clinked in the name of the kingdom's prosperity. This time, I was not among the servants, but to the king's right, wearing a silver-blue gown that reflected the light like water under the moonlight. Nobles bowed respectfully as they passed. Ladies smiled with studied courtesy. The same ones who once avoided me in the corridors now vied for my attention. Alaric slowly rose, still pale but with strength returning each day. The hall fell silent as he raised his goblet. "There are stories," he began, his voice reaching the farthest corners of the hall, "that are told to us from childhood. Stories of destiny, of blood, of promises made under the starlight. For too long I believed these stories were just that, tales to lull children to sleep." His eyes met mine, and the world around seemed to disappear. "But then the river brought back what we believed lost," he continued. "A daughter of the House of Luna, an heir of ancient blood, a woman who defied death, exile, and persecution to restore balance to our kingdom." Murmurs rippled through the hall, glances fixed on me, some in wonder, others still wary. Alaric took a step closer and said, "Before all, no one touches what I saved from the river. No one questions what the moon has blessed. No one separates what destiny has joined." Then, to the surprise and shock of the entire court, he knelt before me, offering not a goblet, but a delicate crown forged of silver and sapphires, the crescent moon symbol at its center. "Lyra of the House of Luna," he declared, his voice now soft, almost intimate despite the crowd watching us. "Do you accept to unite your destiny with mine? Do you accept to rule by my side, not as cousin or counselor, but as queen?" The silence in the hall was so profound that one could hear a feather drop. I looked at this man who had seen me when I was invisible, who had risked everything to protect the truth, who now offered not only his heart, but his kingdom. "I accept," I replied, my voice clear and firm. "Not because destiny decreed it, but because I freely choose this path. I choose you." When the crown touched my head, I felt the lunar medallion pulse against my chest, as if approving my decision. Alaric rose and took my hands in his. Before the entire court, his lips met mine in a kiss that sealed more than a political alliance. It sealed a promise that had begun on the banks of an icy river and culminated there, under the gaze of hundreds. Now, when the wind blows from the north, I still feel the cold of the river, but mixed with the warmth that has never left me. The castle no longer watches me in silence. It sings, it celebrates, it prospers under the joint rule of the sun and the moon, as the court poets say. The story that began in ice found its way to fire. And I, who once was no one, who once was just Lyra of Blackstone Village, the orphan on the river's edge, now carry a name, a purpose, a crown. But above all, I carry the freedom of having chosen my own destiny, and that, more than any title or power, is what truly makes me queen.